We should enjoy those hallelujahs because we don't get to say them again until Easter. So, thank you, John. Speaking of Easter, this Sunday, the last Sunday before Ash Wednesday, we always hear this same story about the transfiguration of Jesus. It's almost like jumping the shark on the resurrection. These three get to see Jesus as he will be, but we get to read it now to remind us maybe that Easter is our final destination as we dive into Lent and start to reflect more and more on what it means to follow Jesus as baptized people, which includes, as it did for Jesus, our own share in his cross. I think this Sunday is meant to encourage us to keep our eyes on the prize. In just a short amount of time, we'll be celebrating that resurrection and eating chocolate eggs. So if you feel yourself getting a little down because it's Lent, you don't like it, or because winter just won't seem to end, this little glimpse of our future is meant to encourage us along the way. The thing is, those first disciples didn't know the ending as we do. Those first disciples on their way to Jerusalem with Jesus had no idea what was ahead. In fact, what happens right after this story is Jesus starts talking a lot about how he's going to be rejected and betrayed and finally crucified before the grand revelation of the life that he brings. These three apostles, and only them, get this little glimpse of what's ahead. But there is a long, difficult journey to come between this day and the Easter day. That's true of those Israelites, too, in the first reading. They've just been delivered from God. They've just been made a people. God's led them through the Red Sea, away from Pharaoh, and now they're at the Holy Mountain. In 40 days' time, they'll get the law that can guide them. And even now, they see the glory of God descending on a mountain, glory that's eventually going to come and land among them and live in a tent while they wander through the wilderness. They're getting a foretaste of what it's like to be God's people, but there's still 40 years before they enter the promised land. It's a long journey ahead. This vision can sustain them, but it doesn't always work when things get really harsh. The thing about both these stories is both these groups of people are ancestors in faith, but the Israelites and our Jewish Christian forebears both get something to hang on to while they walk that difficult journey. For the Israelites, it's this glorious presence of God that just dwells among them, assuring them that whatever's happening, God's glory rests with them. And for those first disciples, it was a vision of the same glory of God, but shining in Jesus, even as they walked a difficult path that eventually leads to Good Friday, to Golgotha. What are those foretastes, those glimpses for us that sustain us as we walk our own, sometimes long journeys through difficult times? I mean, I'd like to think that maybe we've experienced God's glory falling on a mountain or living in a tent with us, but probably not. And if you've seen Jesus transfigured between Moses and Elijah, I wish you'd tell us all about it. But the truth is, we have to look for our own mini transfigurations that sustain us as we walk our own journey. I've been trying to work that this week. Like, what has that been for me? Those things that have sustained me when, well, things weren't going all that well. On one hand, we might all answer, well, it's our faith, of course, and that's fine. And I'm sure that's true a lot of the times. I was looking for something a little bit more concrete. Like a moment that I saw myself and my own journey differently when I realized that I was never really walking alone. Now, the one I landed on is going to sound kind of odd and maybe even a little cheesy. I did write this on Valentine's Day. But it happened about 20-something years ago when I was 29 and teaching in a Catholic high school for the first and only time. Religion to juniors and seniors at a boys' school down in Chicago called St. Patrick's. After about a month, I realized I was not very good at it. I was not very good at it at all. In fact, I didn't even know what I was doing. And I had that sense of feeling like a failure to sink down in me. And it was September. There were 8 months to go. And as I sat at my teacher's desk, imagining what it would feel like to feel like a failure for 8 solid months, I heard this voice, that voice, gently reminding me of all things that my partner David loved me, and I could rely on that. And it was so strong in that moment that I realized that maybe it wasn't the most important thing in the world to be a good religion teacher at a high school in Chicago. That maybe what was more important in that moment was to remember that I was loved and could love others, and to let that glimpse guide me through whatever was going on in my life. I wondered if for a second it was God trying to tell me what God says about Jesus on the mountain. You're my beloved in whom I'm well pleased. Something that God is actually saying to all of us all the time. Except in this moment, God was reminding me that God was loving me that way through David. And it was a wonderful gift. I must be honest, I'm not sure it made me a better teacher. But holding on to that promise of being loved and trying to love back made those 8 months a little bit more enjoyable with those students. Allowed me to get to know them better. Allowed me to quit worrying about what I was going to do in class, although I kept trying. And maybe those 8 months weren't the highlight of my life. They weren't as bad as I thought they would be. And in fact, there were some wonderful surprises along the way that kept assuring me that, I wasn't walking this journey alone. What have those times been for you? I know that they have to be as various as we are. Maybe even unusual or odd at times. Maybe there are people involved or not. But it would be those moments in which you realize, just for a second, you're reminded that you're loved just as you are. That things finally will be okay in the grand scheme. And that maybe this hardest part of the journey is not the whole story. This part will end too. And maybe if we're attentive along the way, we might get little glimpses of the final destination. But we might find that encouragement to remember that Easter always lies ahead of us. On Wednesday we're going to start Lent again, and it's often a time for us to try to reset as baptized people, maybe to make some resolutions, to do a little penance, to reflect on our lives. That's all good. I'm wondering, though, if one of the things we might do as we begin this Lent, though, is to remember, to savor, even to write down those little mini transfigurations that have visited us in our own lives, that have come to us when we felt a little discouraged, maybe a little unloved, maybe like failures. Those moments when God broke through just for a second to remind us that we were God's beloved no matter what was happening. What would it be like to nourish those memories, maybe to discover new ones, even to discover that they're happening a lot more often than we realize? How might paying attention to those wonderful moments and when God breaks in help sustain us as we walk together toward this Easter that celebrates the life that we will all come to share?